Hi, and welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Get CME for this episode by clicking on the CME link in the show notes. Today, we welcome back Joseph Parker. He's a research physician. Today's KevinMD article is titled Cannabis Compounds in Fracture Pain Relief and Healing. Joseph, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much.
So, Joseph has been on multiple times. Go to kevinmd.com/podcast. Search icon, upper right-hand corner, search for his name to hear his story. But today we're going to talk about a recent article in the Journal of Bone and Mineral Research about cannabis compounds and fracture healing. Tell us about the study and how your article came together.
This is a very interesting study. Of course, cannabis has been used for a long time medicinally around the world. It's been found in 5,000 years ago in use in China, Egypt, and Peru. So if you find something spread around the world like that, there's a lot of alternative medications and herbal remedies, and I was very skeptical of them in the past, and we probably should be. And I even object to the term alternative medicine. There's medicine that works, and then everything else is kind of, if it doesn't work, it's bunk. But when something's used over that wide of a geographical area, there's probably a reason for it. And, it was used in the United States medicinally until the early 1900s. So now that things have loosened up a little bit and the research can actually be done, because for the last 70 years, the government would restrict the research you were allowed to do on cannabis. They would grow it at a little place in Mississippi. What they grew was very substandard, and then you could only do research if you agreed it was going to be negative research, looking at its bad effects. So the authors of this study were looking for something to treat fractures specifically. As opiate prescribing is no longer politically popular, you've got to find some way to treat pain. And a fracture is, of course, an extreme source of pain. And people all around the world have fractures all the time. And NSAIDs and Tylenol is often said to be adequate for treating pain. But that's obviously not the case when it comes to a fracture, or at least for most people, it's not the case. And also, NSAIDs inhibit fracture healing. So the inflammatory phase is very important for fracture healing. That callus formation and changes that take place there are necessary, and you can end up with a non-union fracture. You can end up with a fracture that never heals if you use NSAIDs. And then Tylenol is responsible for 50% of all liver failures. If you're trying to treat fracture pain with Tylenol, you're going to be using a lot of Tylenol. And then you end up causing other problems. And then the NSAIDs cause GI bleeds, increased incidence of heart attack, stroke, heart failure, renal failure, and all that. So they were looking for something else to use for pain and fractures, and they were hoping that perhaps something like CBD. Now, CBD is not THC, doesn't get you high, but it has shown some efficacy in treating pain, especially neurogenic pain. And so in some patients get some relief from it. So they were testing it to see if it could be used for fractures. So they tested two compounds, cannabidiol, CBD, and cannabigerol, which is CBG. Now, CBG is a lot less familiar to people. It's less than 1% of the cannabinoids in most cannabis plants is CBG, because it gets converted into the other cannabinoids. But you can breed strains that have a higher amount. And what they found was that CBD and CBG don't just improve pain equally to NSAIDs, which is what their study showed, but that it actually promotes bone healing. So now you've got something that will treat the pain of a fracture at the same time that it improves the healing of the fracture and speeds it up. And they were looking at how this happens, and there will be further studies done later. But it was a very interesting study, and a very, I would say, important one for us to start looking toward as we start looking for things other than opiates to treat pain. Some of these compounds seem to have a very good effect. As a matter of fact, CBG was found to bind the alpha-2 receptors and the 5-HT2A, the serotonin receptors also. And of course, increasing serotonin in the spinal cord increases the effects of descending pain desensitization pathways. So the reason antidepressants will sometimes help some people with pain appears to be because it increases these serotonin levels in the interneurons, and that turns down the volume of pain being reported up to the brain. So whereas CBD works on the cannabinoid receptors and kind of potentiates the effects of our natural endogenous endocannabinoids, which is a anandamide and 2-HE. So it increases the effectiveness of those, which are released, when we're injured to help us with pain. And it also has an effect on the immune system and all
Sure. So to be clear, this is a study that was done in mice. Is it still early on in terms of this finding?
that. Very early on, and it's, you know, see, cannabis is being used medicinally around the United States. And I and probably several other people would argue that the high THC strains, though THC does seem to help pain in some people, it might be better to go with the high CBD, CBG strains, perhaps drop the THC and reduce the risk of psychosis and all the other things that come with THC.
So give us a 30-second primer in terms of what's available legally in most states. I know that there are some dispensaries that sell both CBD and THC. And I know that CBD, you can go to many drugstores who just sell CBD. So for a typical patient who are looking for cannabis-based pain options, what's generally available to them?
They have THC by itself, and of course, Marinol was approved in the 1980s for the treatment of nausea and chemotherapy. But THC by itself appears to not be a bright idea. It appears the CBD moderates the effects of THC, and pure THC has some very psychoactive effects that, except in very extreme cases, should probably be avoided. So CBD, because it is not considered a psychoactive substance by the World Health Organization, the CDC, and most reasonable researchers, it is available almost all over. Now, there are some states that say that if THC is detectable at any level in your CBD, then you can be prosecuted. And that's important to know, because hemp oil, even if it comes from a federally legal plant that is hemp, less than 0.3% THC by mass, it will still have traces of THC in it. So there are companies that use filters to remove all the THC. So if someone's a pilot, a trucker, probably everyone that is in a state where, even in a state where THC is legal, if you get in a wreck and THC is detected in your system, there's a lot of consequences to that. So probably getting the filtered CBD, so there's no THC at all, will have the best effect. So hemp oil with high CBD, CBG content that's been filtered of THC is probably the only reasonably safe way to go right now. And CBD has been approved in a purified form for the treatment of epilepsy in some children, some forms of epilepsy in some children, but it doesn't have to be that concentrated to have, an effect. So over-the-counter medications like, NSAIDs, ibuprofen, Tylenol, they have side effects and things like that too. And the side effects of these chemicals appear to be much less than, over-the-counter NSAIDs kill about 15,000 people a year in the United States and send about 103,000 to the hospital. GI bleed, stuff like that. Tylenol kills quite a few people too, usually by intentional overdose.
So when you go to a drugstore and you're looking for CBD compounds, and I know they come in different forms, they come in tinctures, they come in creams, they come in gummies. Do they all have the same absorption? What should patients generally
The
look for
sad
when
thing is
confronted?
about 40% of the supplements you buy are fake, and that includes at big pharmacies and Walmart. That some research was done. They purchased a bunch of these and tested them. 40% had none of what they were supposed to have. That's for echinacea, coenzyme Q10,
Yeah.
all these supplements. So CBD, I think, should be sourced from a manufacturer in Colorado or Nevada that specifically has sort of a pharmaceutical grade. And there is Folium Biosciences one that produces very high quality. It's two doctorates. I think it's a husband-wife team. I think she has a doctorate in chemistry, and I think he has an MBA, but he may not have a doctorate. And they have a company that produces a very pure product that is federally legal, less than 0.3% THC, so it should be able to ship across state line. If it has no detectable THC, it should be legal in all states. I don't think there's any state that has banned CBD, though California did at one time ban CBD made from hemp, but CBD made from marijuana was okay. Very strange.
Mhm.
These markets are competing to keep each other out, and I don't know if that's still the case in California, but it's important to research your individual state's laws.
Now, where do you see, from a broader perspective, the role of CBD when it comes to just treating acute pain? Like you mentioned, NSAIDs and Tylenol, they have their own issues. CBD is becoming more popular, and we're seeing very preliminary studies about the beneficial effects of cannabis based products on acute fractures. Do you see a role for cannabis based products in just treating run of the mill acute pain going forward?
Absolutely. I have seen patients who were able to stop, strong prescription medications, even opiates, when they had access to alternatives like CBD. Now, that's not going to be everybody, but if it's only 5%, and from what I saw, it was about 15%, but if it's only 5%, that's a considerable number of people. About 40% of the American population will experience chronic pain at some point in their life. We've got 330 million people in this country, so we're looking at about 120 million people right now that will experience chronic pain. If you can get by with something that's over the counter that has a low risk of complications and side effects, then that's always better than even the over the counter stuff that has known dangerous effects. And nothing is without side effects except a vacuum. Even water has side effects, right? And some people die from drinking too much water. So anything can kill you if you get crazy about it. Almost everything is safe for you in moderate, in the right dose.
So tell us some of the side effects of CBD. I understand that you really shouldn't drive while taking CBD products. Is that correct?
You should see how it affects you. You should never drive when a medication or a treatment or even a supplement makes you drowsy. You can take Benadryl and end up too drowsy to drive. So anytime you take something new, you should test its effects. Now with CBD, I would suggest that if people are going to take it, they take it at bedtime. Its effects will have worn off by morning, and they make different preparations. They make one with melatonin for nighttime use. I don't recommend using melatonin at bedtime every time because it's kind of a clock reset. You don't
Mhm.
need to reset your clock every night. It might be okay for a week or so. So anytime you start something, you should check and see what you're getting. You should avoid vaping anything. The vaporizers out there are not safe unless they're like Scandinavian and medical grade, because they can have heavy metals in them. And there's
Mhm.
been a lot of people suffering lung damage from thallium poisoning and lead poisoning, things like that. So inhaling something into your lungs is probably a bad idea. They have hemp oil capsules, and that's probably the best form as far as safety goes. And like I said, these can be ordered through companies from Colorado. Colorado has very strict laws on when something's manufactured there that says it has CBD. The state will go in, randomly select some, test them, and make sure it has what it says it has. So that way you're sure you're getting what you're supposed to be.
Now, in this particular study that we've been talking about earlier, it looked at both CBD and CBG. So I'm actually not that familiar with CBG. Is that widely available?
No, you will not find CBG, preparations right now. You probably will in the future, because it also binds the alpha 2 and the 5-HT2A receptors. It may actually be better for pain than the CBD. It's just that there's so little in most preparations that it's not even tested. So as they test these different cannabinoid structures, they'll find something like this that has an anti-inflammatory, pain relieving response without slowing bone healing. So there are probably other things with any herbal or plant preparation. You've got hundreds, if not thousands, of chemicals running around in there, and when that plant has a beneficial effect, you might think it's one thing doing it. I mean, most people thought it was the THC, and it turned out no, that's actually not what's doing most of what we consider the beneficial effects. It's the CBD, and now we know CBG also.
Is there a habit forming component to CBD products?
Not to CBD. It is considered a non-addictive substance. I know that's a scary thing to say because they said that about Oxycontin. Well, they said less addictive, not non-addictive. Anything that causes a release of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens can lead to addiction. There is no evidence that CBD does this. Now, THC does. So there can be addiction, and it's argued as to whether it's full addiction or, quote, true addiction. Addiction will upregulate the gene delta phos B in the nucleus accumbens, and then things can get out of control. So whereas people, mug their grandmothers to get methamphetamine, nobody really does that to get cannabis at this point. And if you take the THC out, it has no psychoactive effect, has no dopaminergic effect, so it should have no addiction potential. Though something that makes you feel better will make you want to use it. And there's often confusion between I'm addicted to something because I can't say no to it, and I want something because it makes me feel better. All right. Those are two different things, but they get conflated quite often.
What's the general cost of over-the-counter CBD products? Compare that to a bottle of ibuprofen or Tylenol.
That's
Is
a very good
it
question.
cost a consideration?
The quality products will cost a little bit, probably about the same as a supplement like coenzyme Q10, maybe $30 a month, $40 a month if you take it once or twice a day. It's not as cheap as like generic aspirin or generic ibuprofen, but because it appears to have a better side effect profile, it might be worth it. Of course, read up, do your own study. This is one very well done study, and there are other studies that support it. But I'm sure there's nothing out there without consequence, and they'll find some situation where, just like they thought gabapentin didn't have any addictive properties, and now they're saying that people are using very large doses of it to kind of get high, just like dextromethorphan in very high doses is like LSD. There's almost nothing that you can't mess up if you put your mind to it and take a whole bunch of it. But so far, there has been nothing, no serious consequence to these chemicals.
We're talking to Joseph Parker. Today's KevinMD article is titled Cannabis Compounds in Fracture Pain Relief and Healing. Joseph, tell us some of your take-home messages that you want to leave with the KevinMD audience.
I would say that a lot depends on what you're comfortable with and what your other problems are. You should discuss everything with your doctor. If you're going to do something over the counter from home, you should read up on it in depth, and that includes over the counter medications like NSAIDs, Tylenol, Benadryl, anything like that. Some people use Benadryl every night to sleep. That's probably not a good idea, and you can look and read about why.
Joseph, thank you so much for coming back on the show, sharing your time and insight.
Thank you, sir. You have a good day.